Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to create this spooky little tumbler with the perfect epoxy drip. I love how this turned out and I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Okay, let's go. We're going to jump right in with our glitter application. I'm going to mix up some epoxy. I'm using KS Resin Liquid Art Ultra UV. So this is a regular epoxy, not a fast set. And I'm going to mix up 10 milliliters. You're not going to use that much, but I always like to mix more and then use it on something else. The cup we're going to use is a 24-ounce taper from Craft Haven. And I just spray painted it with black spray paint, and I'm going to apply a little bit of this epoxy to my cup. Get a smooth, even, thin layer. I don't want this to be too thin. I kind of want the glitter to soak into the epoxy just a little tiny bit. The glitter we're going to use is Labyrinth from Peachy Olive Glitters, and I'm just going to cover the entire surface of my tumbler with this glitter. I let my cup sit and dry for about 3 hours, and then I was ready to move into my first coat of epoxy. For all of my coats except the final coat, I'm using KS Resin Liquidy Split Ultra UV, so this is their fast setting epoxy. So for this first layer, I'm going to apply about 20 milliliters, and then I'll let this cure for 2 hours, and then go in with a second layer. Make sure you hit the cup with your torch to pop any bubbles and really get that smooth glass finish. So now that I've got 2 coats of epoxy in my cup, I'm going to go in with my craft knife and get rid of all of this glitter and stuff that's up at the top rim. And I'm being really careful. You always want to make sure that you are pointing your knife or moving your knife away from you rather than towards you, just in case you slip like I just did. So I'm only going to clean up the top rim. We want the body of our cup at this point to remain smooth because we're going to put this semi-transparent vinyl on the cup. This is from Banff Custom Creations, and the name of the print is Poisoned Pumpkins. Now, if you were doing this design on a straight edge tumbler, you could just go in and do a regular vinyl wrap on the cup. You don't have to cut your images down or cut this into pieces. But because my cup is tapered, I'm going to save myself a huge headache and just cut all of these images out individually and place them on the cup by hand. Now, all of the spots that on the backing of the vinyl that look white are going to be clear, so those aren't going to show up on your cup. So you can just cut out very loosely. They don't have to be, your cuts don't have to be perfect. You can just cut each image out and place it down individually if you're using a tapered cup like this. So I'm just going to finish placing these images down, just trying to keep the pattern as consistent as I can. And once they are all down, we'll move on to the next step. Once my cup is full of poisoned pumpkins, I'm going to go in with another coat of epoxy. I'm still using my KS Resin Liquidy Split Ultra UV epoxy, and this coat is pretty thin. I'm only going to add about 15 milliliters of epoxy to my cup. I really just want to make sure that it's smooth and that those images are sealed before we go in and create our drip. So for the drip, I want this kind of color. I want to match the color of the pumpkins. So I'm going to make a custom little mica mix. I'm going to use 24 Karat and Bodacious, both from PDB. I'm also going to use November from PDB and then Coppertone from Simply Sarah. So I'm going to take a little mixing cup here, and I'm going to mix up some epoxy before I start to mix my mica. I'm using regular epoxy here. This is the Liquid Art Ultra UV epoxy from KS Resin, and I'm going to mix up about 60 milliliters. For my drip, I'm not going to use 60 milliliters. I'm actually going to mix it up and take 30 out and just use that for a coat on another cup. And now I'm going to make my mica mixture directly into this cup of epoxy. You can see I'm just doing a little popsicle stick spoonful to create my custom color mix. I'm going to mix that up really, really well, make sure that my mica is well mixed into my epoxy, and there's our orange color, perfect. Now the key to getting perfect drips is patience, so I'm going to set that aside and wait about 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes I'm going to start to add my nice and thick. This is from CCDIY. You can also use just plain old cornstarch from the grocery store if you have that. I have this nice and thick on hand, so that's what I'm going to use, but feel free to use cornstarch if you would like. So I'm going to mix a little bit of that into my cup of epoxy, wait another 20 minutes, and then go in with another round of nice and thick. Now I'm waiting in between my addition of nice and thick just because I don't want to use too much of it. So I add a little bit, wait 20 minutes, add a little bit more, wait 20 minutes, you kind of get the pattern here. The consistency we're going for with our epoxy is almost like a peanut butter thickness or like cake frosting. You want it to be thick enough that you can like mold it and, like whip it kind of, but also thin enough that it's going to move a little bit and create those drips. So I like to test my drips or the consistency of the epoxy on the side of my cup here. And based on how quickly the epoxy moves down the cup, I can kind of tell how much longer or how much more of this nice and thick I'm going to need to add. So here I'm going to add a little tiny bit more, mix that in really well, and we should be getting pretty close to the consistency that we're looking for. I'm going to mix this in, and I did end up adding a little bit more of the nice and thick. My drips were moving just a little bit too quickly. It's really a delicate balance of like making sure that your epoxy is not too thick, like so it doesn't move at all, and not, so thin that it just goes all the way down your cup. So I added a little bit more nice and thick, mixed it up, and now I think I'm ready. So I'm going to test my drips on this little medicine cup here just to see how quickly they move, see what the consistency of the epoxy does. I always like to test it out before I just go straight in with my cup or with the epoxy on my cup just to make sure. Now when you apply your drips to your cup, you want to avoid all of those little stringy bits that are going to go down the cup just to make your drips look really clean and nice and, perfect, really. So I'm going to take a little bit of the epoxy on my popsicle stick. I'm going to whip it up, make sure that I don't have any of those little stringy bits hanging down. And then I'm going to go in and just apply the epoxy on the top rim of my cup in a horizontal line, just as thick as you want. The thicker you apply your epoxy, the bigger your drips are going to be, or like the heavier your drips are going to be, if that makes sense. And I'm not applying drips here. I'm really just applying the epoxy right to the top rim of the cup, and then gravity is going to do the rest of the work. Those drips are going to start to fall naturally and look really perfect and like a natural drip. So I'm just going to continue to apply the epoxy in any spots on your cup. If you want to add more epoxy to create a bit of a thicker drip or make it a little bit heavier in that spot, you can always go in and add more on top. Epoxy is self-leveling, so it will even out, as it kind of falls and starts to cure. Once I've got all the epoxy applied to the top rim of my cup, I'm going to just shake it down a little bit to get those drips to start to move, and then I'm going to leave it alone. You don't want to continue to add too much or, babysit your cup too much or shake it down too much, because those drips will fall. I did hit the cup really quick with my heat gun here just to pop any bubbles, and here's a time-lapse video of the drips falling, and there's what they look like when they're all done. Now, once I had the epoxy applied, I did not come back and like flip my cup upside down or like, do any of that stuff. If your drips are falling too quickly, you can hold your cup upside down to kind of reverse that drip pattern a little bit, but your epoxy should be thick enough that you don't have to do that. So I just left it to cure, and then I went in with another coat of epoxy over the entire cup. So we put a coat of epoxy over our drips. Just make sure you get in all of those little crevices, and once you've done that, you should be all finished. So here is the final result. Look at how that glitter sparkles in the sunlight. Looking at glitter in the sun is like a whole nother level of sparkle. I love it. So that's it for this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you hit the thumbs up button down below, and make sure you subscribe to my channel if you're not already. I upload brand new Tumbler tutorials every Tuesday and Saturday. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, love you. Bye.